This is the first time we've done this on this channel. We're reacting to a video where someone, you know, these people, they always want to jibber jabber. They want to yip yap online. They want to talk on Twitter, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube videos, even like this one, but they refuse to actually sit down and have a fully fleshed out debate. We can have a moderator of your choosing. I open this invitation to, you know, anyone that has some meaningful following, right? I think this guy might even have, no, he doesn't have more followers than me. I think he's had his channel for a very long time, but he's got almost as many followers as me on YouTube. He made a video. This is someone named Mentiswave, made a video titled Debunking Hinkle. Sorry, I should have given you the trigger warning. Yes, this person is a Reddit gamer, anime lover. You know what that means, right? You're going to be seeing him on a Gideon video soon, a Skeeter Gene video soon. So debunking Hinkle. China is proof communism does not work. So we're going to be reacting to this video. It's, you know, relatively short. It's 10 minutes. And in the 10-minute video, you can decide for yourself as to whether or not this individual put together a convincing argument that China is not, China is proof communism doesn't work. That is what this house holds, a Mentiswave house, okay? And anyways, I'll just start it off before we get into the video. I mean, obviously, this is like a meme that these Redditors, they say like, oh, China's not communist, right? Even Scott Horton, who I hold in high regard in many aspects, right? He does brilliant reporting at antiwar.com. His books are pretty good, right? A good historian, documenting U.S. war crimes, U.S. imperialism. He seems to forget, of course, that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and Lenin was the man who defined it as such, and that's the definition that we all use today, of course. And anyways, but Scott Horton even said, and he replied to me in a tweet, I ratioed him. He was like, oh, well, China is actually successful now because they adopted Friedmanite economics. And I'm like, in what world is China, you know, ascribing to the worldview, to the writings, to the works of Milton Friedman? Let's be real here. In China, all of the land is owned by the state. Does that sound like capitalism? Does that sound like Milton Friedman? Where did Milton Friedman write about that? The only land that is not owned by the state in China is owned by like collective farm workers and rural communities. Okay. So yeah, that's apparently Milton Friedman. What else do we have? He said that China's Friedmanite economics. China, they have like 4,300 different banks, 4,400 different banks. I think it's about 15 or 17 are categorized as private. All of the other banks are publicly state-owned, right? And by private, they mean that, like, you know, less than 50% owned by the state. So everyone kind of knows that around 30% of a company, if you have enough shadow companies that have enough stock in the company, it can technically be defined as still a state-owned enterprise. So 17 banks out of over 4,300 are private. The other 4,300 roughly are all publicly owned state-owned banks. In China, they have rigorous 5-year economic plans, which all state-owned enterprises, partially state-owned enterprises, and private companies must adhere to. And if you don't adhere to it, you're going to have a very big problem, meaning like Walmart cannot come into China and then tell the Chinese how their economy has to operate like Walmart does in other countries, right? These plans are created and enforced by the Communist Party of China, and they are not influenced by any sort of foreign companies, right? And even a lot of the foreign companies that come and operate in China, they have to enter into public-private partnerships in effect. And guess who is the majority stakeholder in these companies? So actually, this Mentiswave guy that made this video is not even smart enough to bring that argument to the table in this video, but For example, right, Volkswagen will come in and they are forced into a public-private partnership with the Shanghai municipal government, and the Shanghai municipal government owns the plurality or majority of whatever sort of joint ventures they embark upon. McDonald's, everyone knows McDonald's is in China. Guess what? McDonald's in China is 52% owned by the Communist Party of China. Go figure. Go figure, right? This is how it works in China. It's not like the U.S. It's not like any other country for the most part. Also worth noting that in China, it is legally mandated that all of the core tenets of the state economy must be owned by the state. So you look at any number of enterprises or sectors of the economy, whether it's military industrial output, whether it's tech stuff, whether it's hydroelectric power, oil, gas, coal, whether it's any sort of these sorts of things, right? Steel making, ship making, it is all controlled by the state and owned by the state. So again, I just will put the question forward to Scott Horton, to Mentiswave, to anyone who, in what world is that capitalist? In what world is that capitalist? Okay, now let's watch the video and break it down, and we'll react to it. I'm doing this because the video actually managed to get about 36,000 Reddit views. So we'll break it down. We'll entertain this.
Hey internets, so if you don't know who Jackson Hinkle is, he's basically a Nuts Bowl-leaning communist, so a so-called conservative communist, and co-founder of the American Communist Party, who, like many tankies wanting to push the claim that communism can work, have been desperately clinging to China as if it's the ultimate example of—
What does this mean that, like, Redditors think that, anime nerds think that, like, Winnie the Pooh is banned in China because they think it looks like Xi Jinping? I had a friend who was in China last week, and he was like at the airport, and there was like Winnie the Pooh stuff being sold, or he was like at some mall, and there was like a children's toy store that he walked by, and they had like a Winnie the Pooh. It's just the dumbest things they make up.
Of communist success. In fact, Hinkle's pretty much been doing this on Twitter every single day. It's rare a day goes by that he doesn't post effectively the exact same post. This post that just consists of a claim that China is proof that communism works, alongside either a picture or most at a time a video of some Chinese skyline at night. Sometimes it's Shenzhen, or it could be Shanghai or Guangzhou. Doesn't really matter which one it is, all the posts are effectively the same. Just about every day ad nauseum. Now, even though I have already made a longer video on this subject, explaining in detail why trying to claim that China is successful communism is a very, very false claim, I figured it'd be useful to have a quick rant video as well that more specifically focuses on just the point that Hinkle is trying to push here, of saying, oh wow, look how advanced these cities look, therefore communism works. And I'll be
like, that is kind of part of that is mainly the argument. It's like, yeah, the cities work very well, and that is proof that their communist system works. Yes, that is the argument. So let's see how he debunks this,
showing why this is not only entirely false, but when you understand exactly why this take from Hinkle is false, you'll realize that these hot RGB Chinese skylines are actually one of the biggest experiments proving that communism does not work. So let's just get started with asking, okay, why do these cities look like this? Well, there's three reasons as to why. The first and most obvious is that these cities are actually just kind of new. Most Chinese cities really only started looking like this at the end of the 20th century or towards the beginning of the 21st century. If you look at photos of, say, New York City and compare them to photos of Chinese cities in the mid-1900s or even early 1900s, you'll see a pretty big difference. So for instance, in the United States, let's take a look at the Times Square. Here's a photo of New York City in the mid-1900s, and here's that same area of the Times Square today. And while there is definitely some differences here, you'll notice it's not huge differences. It's really just been updated for current modern technology. More lights, more billboards, more businesses, more electricity. And of course, some differences in culture that have happened throughout the years, for better or for worse. While technology in the mid-1900s version is obviously not as advanced, it hasn't really changed horribly. But for the most part, it's pretty well.
Bro, I don't even need to say it. But type a 1 in the chat if you think that the streets of New York Times Square specifically, since that's what he's using here in this photo. Which is this even a photo? This is probably a photo, right? This is not a painting. This looks like a photo. Okay, I would be willing to bet all of my money, right? I'd be willing to bet everything I own that the streets of Times Square, back whenever this is 1950s, are 1 gajillion times cleaner than the streets of New York today. And type a 1 in the chat if you agree.
Well developed. If you look at this at a very quick 1-second glance, you might be able to convince yourself that it's a modern photo. It becomes obvious that it is.
No. Let's go back. I cannot convince myself this is a modern photo because where is the all the homeless people? Where are the people, the crack addicts on the streets running up to you with a knife? As you know, there's like literally however many tens of thousands of homeless people in New York because their infrastructure is crumbling. No, this actually does not look like modern New York, right? There's not garbage all over the streets everywhere. There's not like a OF girl doing like a TikTok live in the street here as society decays around her. Actually, no. Actually, the only thing that changes in New York City, or any American city for that matter, the only thing that actually changes is the capability of the major financial institutions to advertise to you. That's the only good thing that changes, if you consider that a good thing. That's like the only material, qualitative improvement that I can see in any of these cities is like, oh, they have like, in New York City, in Times Square in particular, they have like bright lights and they've gotten better at advertising to the people. Buy this Goislop and you'll love it and your life will be forever changed by it and forget about the Iran war. And that's the only thing that has materially improved in New York City. Okay, everything else. I mean, look at this. Does that look like a bad place to be? No, that looks like a very nice place to be. Now, if you've been to Times Square at any point over the last few years, you know that Times Square is literally like walking through. It feels like you're walking through an escape room with like pop out jump scares every 5 minutes of some like crack addict that's threatening to steal your watch or steal even the pizza that you're eating or whatever it is, and you got to jump over rats and human fecal matter as you're walking on the street. Same thing in Los Angeles, right? Same thing in Los Angeles. When I lived in Los Angeles, like, don't get me wrong, I love California. It's a beautiful state, very beautiful state. But like in Los Angeles, I lived in downtown LA for about 2 years. Every single day when I went out, and I walked quite a bit. I didn't use my car. I'd just walk everywhere, and there's no public transport there. So you either Uber or you walk in LA. You're like every single block, you have to jump over human shit, and the streets all around you smell like piss. And there's homeless people that you're literally forced to either walk over or avoid being stabbed or having a gun pointed at you or someone coming up and trying to physically assault you.
1-second glance, you might be able to convince yourself that it's a modern photo.
But, they're better at advertising the Goislop to you.
It becomes obvious that it isn't when you look at the cars for more than just a glance. They're very obviously mid-1900s cars, but it at least kinda passes the glance test. Whereas China, on the other hand, if you look at this from Travel China on Instagram, we suddenly see quite the transformation. A lot of these Chinese skylines that we're seeing being posted by Hinkle back in the mid-1900s, they were either sparsely populated farming towns with almost no development at all, or they were poorly developed shanty towns that...
How is that an L? How is it an L that in the 90s, China's now major cities, of which they have too many to count, now major developed, beautiful, clean cities, digital, these digital landscapes where everything is a touch of a button for you. It's like, how is it an L that they looked like that?
These skylines
they looked like that in the 90s. So you're telling me that we should not appreciate the fact that in the 90s, a lot of Chinese towns that looked like this, and now they're major metropolitan centers with booming tech and industry and manufacturing and international trade and culture, and they're clean. You're telling me that we should oppose that? I don't know what his argument is here. His argument apparently is that China did it quickly, and like that is some sort of an indication of their failure. I don't know. Whereas in the U.S., if you look at the cities, the major cities, which clearly Mentiswave has not been to at any point in recent history, because he somehow believes that New York City is some golden age or something, and is not littered with crime, homelessness, drugs, so on and so forth. You look at these cities and they have degraded. The infrastructure has degraded. You talk to any New York City resident, ask them about the metro system, ask them about the metro system in LA, ask them about the homelessness crisis. I mean, our cities are literally falling apart. He wants to show, okay, so what's worse? What's worse? In China, their cities go from this in 40 years to this. In China, their cities went from this in 30 to 40 years, they then turned into this. What's worse, that they made a positive transformation, or that our once great cities, or we can even look at cities that were developed heavily, went through a lot of development in the 90s and in the early 2000s in America, which should be our new cities, right? Because he said that, oh, well, Chinese cities look so nice and are so clean because they're new, right? In the United States, our new cities that were developed heavily in the 90s and the early 2000s, for example, this one right here, what is this? This is, what is this? This is Austin, Texas. Okay, so a city that went through heavy amounts of big development in the 90s to early 2000s, right? This is Austin, Texas. This is Austin, Texas, folks. If there was a single video or photo of any major city that I post in China on my Twitter account that looked like this in China, people would never, ever leave me alone, and they'd say, but Jackson, the rest of the city looks like this. This is Austin, Texas, a new city in America. They are degrading. They are falling apart. Oh, here's another new city that went through a lot of new development, even currently is going through a lot of big development projects right now, big real estate, residential projects. Of course, they've had the Strip for a long time, but there's a lot of new development going on in Las Vegas. This is what Las Vegas looks like when you get off the Strip. Homelessness everywhere in Las Vegas. What about Atlanta? Atlanta is a city that is going through a real estate boom right now and went through a lot of big development in the 90s and early 2000s, right? Same thing. Crime, drugs, homelessness, crumbling infrastructure. We could go on and on. Phoenix, Arizona. Here's another one for you. A new city, right? China's cities only look so cool and are so clean and so safe and so prosperous because they're new. Well, let's take a look at the cities in America, because our new cities look like this no matter which one you choose.
Signs of a poor country. The buildings look cheap, poorly planned, and almost as if they're rotting. And so you could easily tell yourself, okay, waking up in New York in 1950s, that wouldn't be so bad of a life. Whereas you probably wouldn't say the same thing about China in the 1900s. And why is that relevant? Well, because these cities are new, that means they are built and developed based on, new standards. It's a lot easier to install that dank RGB lighting when you're building the building in an era where that technology has been better fleshed out.
I just debunk that whole argument. Is it the new standards of the United States that we have 800,000 homeless people all across our cities? Is that part of the new development standards of the United States? Because China doesn't have that problem. So what? Do we just need to update our standards to match communist China, and then magically we're going to have all of our 800,000 homeless people disappear overnight? I mean, what is the argument here? They have new standards, so their buildings look cool and their cities are clean and people respect where they live. And, the government actually works for them. Therefore, they respect the cities that their governments undertake to develop. Let's be real here. Come on. And I love that he keeps sharing this clip of the RGB light, and you have some I presume someone like autistic kid or something, like looking at the lights, like he's obsessed with the lights, and he's saying anyone who looks at China's skyline and is just like captivated by the LED lights is they're retarded, because a city is more than just LED lights. Okay, well, I mean, we can look at anything. We can look at their manufacturing levels. We can have a debate about their manufacturing levels. We can have a debate about their energy output, which radically outpaces the United States's. We can have a debate about their steel. We can even have debates about their individual sectors, their manufacturing sector, their steel, their shipbuilding capacity, their tech industry. We can have a debate about any of this stuff. We can have a debate about how clean the cities are. We can have a debate about how these Chinese cities, they have like 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail across China. They have so much high-speed rail in China that they can build one track that goes around the earth an entire time and still be left over with 8,000 spare kilometers of high-speed rail. 70% of the world's high-speed rail is in China. 93% of all cities in China with a population of over 500,000 are connected by high-speed rail. And even though they've already built 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, they want to hit 75,000 kilometers of high-speed rail by 2035. And they're on pace to beat that right now. So, like, what do we want to talk about? We want to talk about LED lights, because I post about the beautiful skylines, of course, but I also post about all this stuff. So we can have a discussion about any of this. I'd love to. For example, we can compare the 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in China to the less than 1 kilometer of high-speed rail in the United States, which costed the United States, I believe, about $100 billion in the state of California, and they only laid down less than 1 kilometer of high-speed rail.
Oh, that's pretty much it. But that, of course, then just brings us to another question, which brings us to our second reason. Why are these buildings so new? Why didn't China build them until the later half of the 20th century? Why did China wait so long to actually have some real, somewhat decent urban development? And that's where we run into the first major problem of what Chex and Hinkle is trying to push here. Economic growth under Mao Zedong in China during the rise of the Chinese Communist Party was effectively zero back then, thus stalling any real serious Chinese urban development plans until after Mao Zedong passed away. This is why
it's amazing that no one's ever picked up a history book. It's amazing that these Redditors have like never gone to one single world history class in their lives. I mean, even someone as low IQ as Mentiswave should understand that like China kind of went through some stuff, right? China kind of went through some stuff. They kind of had like a different system that was governing over them. They had some sort of threats that were levied against them for an extended period of time. We can look at modern Chinese history and you can pick whichever one you want to dive into. I mean, there's too many to count. You have the first Opium War, 1839 to 1842. You have the Dore Tibetan War, an internal conflict, ethnic conflict. You have the Taiping Rebellion. You have Second Opium War. You have this very strong foreign intervention from countries, the most powerful countries all across the world. Panthay Rebellion, Dungan Revolt, another interethnic conflict, Neon Rebellion, Sino-French War. You have the first Sino-Japanese War. You have the Boxer Rebellion. You have the 1911 Revolution. You have the warlord era, 12 years of just like actual warlordism, conflicts all across the country for over 12 years straight, where it's just absolute chaos and madness and warlordism all across the country. The Northern Expedition, launched by the NRA of the Kuomintang. You have the Chinese Civil War, obviously that being the biggest, extremely bloody, extremely costly. And you have the Second Sino-Japanese War, which was taking place at the same time, led by Chiang Kai-shek, Kuomintang, and eventually finished by eventually finished by the Communist Party of China putting an end to it, right? And reigning victorious. So, I mean, like, you literally had all these wars. You had a feudal society where they would bind people's feet together. These landlords would torture and abuse these people. They had no sustenance. They had no way to live their lives. They had no future, no hope, right? They had no access to any sort of trade in many parts of the country. They had no real in many of these rural parts of the country, they had no agriculture even. They had like one little water well for communities of thousands of people, and they couldn't grow any products, any crops. They couldn't do anything. So, yeah, I mean, China does have a little bit of a different history that they came out of at the start of the revolution, right? So kind of different scenario than to compare this to the United States, right? Just a little bit different. But that's what he's doing here.
Quite possibly the most insane communist lie that still persists and think he's still pushed today is trying to say that China reduced the most amount of global poverty. Well,
and I'll also throw in this clip. This is a great clip from Eric Lee, who is a very famous Chinese entrepreneur and political thought leader, who very, very, aptly puts that argument to bed that like, oh, well, China didn't develop until Deng Xiaoping or something. Take a listen to this.
The other 4 countries in BRICS, if you separate their numbers, China of the collective growth average and all
for success, just GDP growth?
Well, not.
What metrics are you using though for success? Just GDP growth?
Well,
living standards?
Yes. I mean, let me tell you what measure I do use, and it's not about getting rich. It's not about getting rich. We lifted 700 million people out of abject poverty in 40 years. This is not a term getting rich could.
And that number now is almost 900 million people they lifted out of poverty in about 48 years. So this video is a bit old. That number has increased dramatically over the past 5-6 years.
Capture. All right. I mean, if we look at poverty alleviation, if we take out China's numbers, the rest of the world would gone backwards in poverty alleviation. So we lifted all of the people out of poverty in the last 30, 40 years. And this is not about getting rich. It's about people living with basic dignity.
I agree with that. That's been a tremendous accomplishment of the Deng Xiaoping. But as I mentioned before...
Oh, this guy's got the Koch Patel, sir. I agree with that. That's been a trend. Thomas Sowell told me that was a tremendous achievement of the Deng Xiaoping era. But what I'm saying is that it's all Mao's fault, right? That you had such problems before that, right?
Or a lot of that was just a corrective for where China should have been had it not been for the first 30 years.
That's not the case. Let me correct that. So in 1949, when Mao took over China, our average life expectancy was 41 years old. Okay, I don't know about the two of you. You look young. I had already lived past.
You're the youngest looking dude on the stage.
41 years old, okay? And literacy rate, 15%. Immunization rate, 0. By 1976, when Mao died, average life expectancy was 68. All right, literacy rate was 80%, close to 100% of young people. Immunization rate, 100%. There's no way that Deng Xiaoping would be able to launch the reforms successfully without those enormous, amazing accomplishments. In fact, if you look at the numbers, by 1978, at a very low income per capita, still poor country, on that basis, China was already within striking distance to developed countries in terms of the UN Human Development Index.
Yeah, so that's all extremely important information. And again, if anyone were to just open a history book, if you go to China, you meet these elderly Chinese citizens. I mean, they'll tell you happily about what it was like living under feudalism. They'll tell you about how their families had nothing. Their families were being tortured by, these landlords and this class of actual hawks. And they're very proud of what accomplishments were made and what sacrifices had to be given to reach this goal that they have now achieved and they're not done with. And they're very, very adamant that they're not done. And they have many goals left unaccomplished that they're still working on. Well, let's get back to Mentiswave.
The reason China was able to reduce the most amount of global poverty is because nearly all of the global poverty back then in the later half of the 20th century was in China. If you look at China's privatization graph of their economy and look at their poverty graph at around roughly the same time frame, you will see that they are clearly reverses of each other, which means it's kind of like patting yourself on the back for coming in last in the race.
It's kind of like patting your back for coming last in the race. No, it's not like that. It's like starting the race last and coming in first place and then having some dipshit like Mentiswave make a video about you. Also, it's worth noting that this image right here, the graph, it goes up until 2003, and it says that there's a increase in. It says in China, employment growth is led by the private sector, state-owned enterprises versus individual firms with fewer than 8 workers, private firms, 8 workers or more, foreign-owned companies. Now, I told you that it's kind of a joke, like foreign-owned entities, foreign-owned companies in China are kind of a joke, because even though China owns 52%, the Communist Party owns 52% of McDonald's, it's still classified as a foreign-owned entity because McDonald's, their shareholders own more than 30% of the McDonald's Corporation in China, established in China, even though China owns the actual majority, 52%. It's still classified as a foreign company. Okay, and that's the same with other quote unquote foreign-owned firms, because even though they technically could be called a state-owned firm because they have majority ownership, 30% of its shares are owned by a foreign entity, so they just call it a foreign entity. So really, it's a misnomer. And then you have idiots like this make graphs that supposedly show like increases in foreign-owned companies when it actually doesn't show that. And the same thing is true about private firms. If 30% is owned by private, shareholders, then they will call it a private firm. It doesn't matter how much is controlled by the state. It doesn't matter if there's like, again, 52% owned by the state. It doesn't matter if there are subsidiaries of subsidiaries. And when you finally reach the top of the tree, a state-owned enterprise owns all of these subsidiaries that are major holders in the private-owned firm. They will still classified as a private firm. And there's very specific reasons why they do that, actually, but it's just worth noting.
Wording it as saying, hey, I ran the longest. It's a completely ridiculous argument to make. It's just using semantics to avoid the reason as to why. If you are in the top 10 countries for size and population, and your country is the last country to develop itself to the point where its global poverty rating holds steady at below 5%, well, during that time frame where they were the last country to do that, well, then of course they're going to be the ones who reduce the most amount of global poverty. Is
it also worth noting that China has the highest GDP by purchasing power parity? I mean, that's really the only useful means of measuring annual GDP is by purchasing power parity, and they have the highest. They beat the United States by like 5 trillion last year.
Amazingly stupid argument when you realize the trick behind it, which then brings us to the third reason. Okay, so what changed after Zedong fell?
Someone in the chat says also China did that without colonization. No, China did that not without colonization. They did that while literally fending off colonization, not just in their own country, but in their allied nations, their brotherly nations as well. They did it while fighting off colonization in Korea.
Well, next up came the reign of Deng Xiaoping, and under his rule in the CCP in the late 1970s, China established what you can call special economic zones. These were experimental areas where they had significantly relaxed market regulations, or in other words...
So he says that, so his whole argument in this video is that China's economic success is as a result of special economic zones, which is ludicrous on its face if you just look at how much of the annual GDP is generated by state-owned enterprises. It's ludicrous on its face when you look at that graph that we were looking at earlier, for example, and the Heritage Foundation even admits that in a period of 1990 to 2003, it was found that only around 7% of all listed firms in China could truly be considered private. These companies are allowed to have access to private revenue, but their control rights are strongly within the hands of the state and should therefore be considered state firms. And they explained how by looking at specific companies and specific collaborative, joint cooperation agreements between state-owned enterprises and, in some cases, private companies and some cases foreign-owned companies. So his whole argument is that these special economic zones somehow are the result of China's economic success, and therefore that means that like capitalism wins. Many things we could point out here that are ludicrous. We can start with the simple fact that markets literally existed before capitalism. Markets are not inherent to capitalism, and the presence of markets does not mean that there is a lack of communism. Markets predate capitalism. Capitalism just talks about who actually gets to control the destiny of these markets. Who gets to control the destiny of these markets, what these markets do, and who reaps the benefits of these markets. That's what capitalism says. It's in the hands of a wealthy few, of the ownership, of the owning class, the land-owning class, as we saw in China's history. When you look at China today, I mean, it's much different. Much different. He's going to bring up special economic zones, but the flagship special economic zone in China is the Shenzhen economic zone, special economic zone. The Shenzhen special economic zone is the flagship economic zone because of companies like Huawei. And Huawei is very interesting because even though it, of course, has to adhere to all of the, state economic plans, the economic planning, the 5-year plans, 10-year plans, so on and so forth, despite the fact that it has strict oversight and all of the, regulatory framework that it has to operate under from the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. Huawei is owned 99% by the workers and retirees. The founder of Huawei only owns 1.3%, if memory serves correct, of Huawei. The other 98% is owned by the workers of Huawei, by their union, and the retirees of Huawei. So it's like, what are we even doing here? Special economic zones were started by way of the state-owned enterprises in China having a flow of foreign capital in these special zones. But this was done under strict regulation, okay? It doesn't mean that these companies get to come in and invest capital and dictate to the Chinese how their economies will operate. No, that's not what it means at all.
These were zones where they would abolish their communist policies in terms of how the market would function. And so while these areas would still be under the wing of the CCP, these areas were now under a capitalist experiment. And so more free trade.
How are they under the wing of the Communist Party, but also under a capitalist experiment? That doesn't even make sense.
Reduced taxes, less rules against foreign investment, less CCP meddling and bureaucracy, and privatization of industry. Or to put it simply, the Special Economic Zones policy was basically just the CCP implementing capitalism, but only in specific areas of China, not China as a whole. And so then,
again, I'll just come back to the simple point that you have like 60, I think it's about 68% of the GDP in China, and increasing year by year, is produced by state-owned enterprises. As I mentioned, when you look at the companies on the stock exchanges, like 93% of them are directly or indirectly controlled by the state and owned by the state. And when you look at these special economic zones, guess what? They're comprised almost entirely of Chinese domestic companies, okay? They're comprised of Chinese companies. And yes, there is joint collaboration, there is investment that is being pushed in, but China does not sacrifice their moral principles and their vision and their economic agenda.
Of course, you might be wondering, okay, well, what were these special economic zones? Where were these areas that the CCP decided to allow some capitalism? Well, here's a map of the special economic zones right here. Places like Shenzhen, Shanghai, and a bunch of coastal areas like Guangzhou. Yep, that's pretty much it. Quite a few zones, actually. And now, you might remember from the start of this video that those names might sound a little bit familiar to you, which then brings us to this. Here's a map of the places that Jackson Hinkle is largely pulling from when he's posting videos of the Chinese skyline. And now, of course, you might be wondering, wait a minute, Mentis, this is exactly the same map as the map you just showed where China decided to try capitalism. And you would be correct, yes.
So his whole argument, so we're finally getting to the crux, the end here. This is his whole argument. China's special economic zones, led under the tutelage of, these local governments, under the tutelage of Deng Xiaoping and his plans, right? A state plan for special economic zones, right? Where state-owned enterprises would be operating in special zones that would allow for foreign investment, right? But still state control of the companies and the direction of the economy. He's saying that the reform and opening up period is responsible for the beautiful cities, the clean cities, the technological advances, the likes of which most Americans couldn't even begin to imagine in their own hometowns, in their own cities, the lack of crime, the safety, the level of manufacturing, the level of output, the level of energy production, right? He says this is everything in China that's good and nice is as a result of these special economic zones, which, let's just say, despite everything I've told you, let's just say hypothetically that is the case. And like all morals, all principles, all laws, all regulation, all everything is abandoned in these special economic zones. Let's just be stupid and take Mentiswave at his word. Well, I would say two things. I would say, so they did that, and then they invested all of the money into making these beautiful, safe, amazing, clean cities. And that's like, we're supposed to say that like, ha China, ha, you guys did a mistake. What are we supposed to do with that? So you're saying, so according to your argument is, instead of, taking all of the money and letting it sit in the bank accounts of a transnational elite, China reinvested the money in making beautiful places to live and like creating infrastructure, the likes of which we don't see anywhere else on the face of the earth, and we probably won't for many years to come. You're telling me that that's somehow indicative of like a system that resembles ours in America, ours on Wall Street, the city of London? Are we serious? Now, the other thing I would say to Mentiswave is, if that's what China did, why can't we do that in America? What is stopping America from doing that? What is stopping America from having all major core sectors of the economy owned by the state? What is stopping America from having all land owned by the state? What is stopping America from having even things as simple as, no taxes on like rural agricultural workers? What is stopping America from having 48,000 kilometers of high-speed rail? What is stopping America from having 99% of all the banks owned by the state and the people? What is stopping us? Could it be the capitalist system?
It is exactly the same map, at least for the most part. The vast majority of the time when Jackson Hinkle is posting these Chinese skylines, he is showing you a video of a skyline of a city where the Chinese Communist Party stepped away from and allowed capitalism as an experiment. In other words, it's the largest scale experiment that it's capitalism that works. The communists stepping away.
That's just bullshit. I went to Guizhou, I went to Guiyang, I went to the most rural places in the Guizhou province, which used to be the poorest place in all of China. So rural that nothing can get to it. It used to be like 6-7 hour drives through dirt roads to get from one village to another village. And China has built 5 of the top 10 tallest bridges in the world in the Guizhou province now. All to connect, villages with like a few thousand farmers to one another. That's why they did it. China has built 7 of the top 10 largest bridges in the world. 5 of the top 10 are in the former poorest province in all of China, in Guizhou.
Away and allowing a free market capitalist economy to flourish in certain areas, but within the same country, thus controlling for ethnicity, culture, education, etc., etc. And so the normal commie cope of saying embargoes or something like that, where they claim that a communist country only failed because of embargoes like Cuba, well, those kind of ridiculous excuses don't work here.
Oh, now we're just trying to compare China's economy to Cuba's economy. That's amazing.
Anymore, because it's within the same freaking country. And so when Hinkle is posting these videos and saying this is proof that communism works,
we're comparing a small, isolated, tiny-ass island off the coast of Miami to China. And saying, well, they argue that the embargoes are what hurts, but China, the capitalism helps.
He is showing you a video of a skyline of a city in China that was designated as a special economic zone where they would no longer be operating under communist policies, but instead were operating.
Something tells me if I only posted the cities in China that were the furthest away from any special economic zone and said that they're also beautiful and proof that communism works, Mentiswave would still have a crash out.
Operating under capitalist policies. And the only exceptions are the times where he posts a city that wasn't an SEZ, it's a city that's within the same metro area. And so that's the economically benefited from the.
Oh, why does this Epsteinite Mentiswave have like a little girl up here? What even is this? Why are grown-ass men watching anime and have these little girl avatars? Like, what is this?
Same policy, as opposed to showing pictures of inland China that were not anywhere near these SEZs, because of course, a lot of them.
Yes. I would love to see what Mentiswave searched on Google to find these images. Find these images from who knows however many years ago, and like we got to get the perfect image and put some crazy filter on it and make it look super depressing and upset. And this is probably India or something. Like what even is this stuff? It's probably like a fire. This looks like a collapsed building, like there was like a fire or something. Like it's crazy.
Still have dirt roads and are poorly developed and effectively still look like a third world country. And yes, that is completely as ridiculous as it sounds. When you understand the trick and the history behind it, it becomes obvious that this is an absolutely insane lie. Which then brings us to our bonus question. If it's such an
I will say, I did, when I was in Guizhou, right, the what used to be the poorest province in all of China. I did ride on a dirt road. I did ride on a dirt road, right, for an extended period of time. But that's because there was like a huge crash on the highway, and something really, really bad happened. It was like a lot of fatalities, or I don't even know, but maybe it wasn't a lot of fatalities. All I know is there was a big crash. But literally, that's what I'm saying. They built the largest bridges on the face of the earth in what was their poorest province to try and help villagers get across from village to village, like farmers and stuff, and like migrant workers and stuff. It's like, this is, would we ever do something like that for any state in America, let alone for Appalachia? Would we do that for Appalachia? Would we do that for West Virginia? Blue Ridge Mountains, would we do that for them? Like, and wherever, Baltimore, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. What was that in 2022, 24? I think it was 2024, right? 2024, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed, and we're now in 2026, and they haven't even started building the bridge. The design plans are only like 60% done, and they're saying it's not going to be done until 2032 at the best, and it's going to cost $5 billion, something like that. They're already saying it's going to cost, and that's a significant increase from what they were initially estimating. Meanwhile, China builds the world's largest bridge in the most secluded rural region on the face of in their country, and it's the largest bridge on the face of the earth, and they built it in 2.5 years for $280 million. Go figure.
Obviously false narrative that Hinkle is pushing here, then why is he pushing it? And well, that's exactly the reason why he's pushing it. One of the most bizarre and most brazen tactics of communists is to proudly and boldly tell absolutely insane lies through their teeth while completely ignoring all evidence to the contrary. You can kind of think of it as a tactic of, okay, if we just scream our lies loud enough and hard enough and long enough.
Yes, the communists. I totally look like this, don't I? Why does Mentiswave never put a picture of him on his screen, let alone him side by side with me? I totally look like that. Right? I'm the communist. I look like the communist that Mentiswave put up, right? All right, let's wrap this.
Our lies will blot out the sound of truth. It's a tactic entirely designed to just drown out the refutations. The fact that Hinkle's point here is just an obviously false narrative actually in some ways is to his benefit, because an average normal responsible person, a normal reasonable person, would usually assume that nobody would be insane enough to tell a lie this ridiculous and to tell it over and over and over again. And so thus people who are not informed on the matter end up becoming more likely to fall for those lies. Or to use a pop culture reference, as much as I dislike doing so, a really good example here would be like the demons from Freyrin. In Freyrin, demons, they just kind of act like humans and they look like humans, but their psychology is completely different. The demons
what is he talking about now? He's talking about, what is this? What are we doing here? I'll admit, I did not watch this far into the video before I decided I was going to react to it. How does this have 36,000 views? What is this?
From Freyrin. In Freyrin, demons, they just kind of...
In Fragrant? Bro's a grown-ass man talking about emo demons and anime demons.
Act like humans and they look like humans, but their psychology is completely different. The demons in Freyrin, for them, words are just sounds that they use to deceive humans. They don't actually care about what they're saying. They don't actually have emotions or feelings. They just use words to make it appear like they do in order to trick humans to letting them eat them. By pretending to have morals and pretending to be similar, the humans are tricked into letting their guard down because they take what the demons are telling them at face value without realizing that they're talking to a demon. That's basically the same tactic that the communists are using here. They're taking advantage of the good faith and good nature of the average person and using that against them because the average person would assume that nobody would tell a lie this ridiculous. But the sad truth is that's exactly what Hinkle is doing. Jackson Hinkle knows darn well that what he's saying here is a lie. I can guarantee you that the chances are very close to zero that Hinkle does not know that he is just boasting skylines of special economic zones.
Look, all I know is that as soon as the American Communist Party takes power in America, we're instantly sending all of the Redditors to the gulags. That will be act number one. That's for sure. And then maybe Mentiswave can achieve good standing in the country once more in the party by building beautiful skylines that he likes to talk about and cleaning up cities like New York. I think that would be a good step. We'll ban anime, we'll send the Redditors to the gulags, and we'll all be much happier as a result of it. That's for sure. Anyways, I did want to show you this last clip here. This is from a shout out to Red God, a new YouTube channel doing great work, right? He did this video. Here's a short little clip. I think also we'll touch on some of the stuff we were talking about, but also further dismantling whatever, can't even call that an argument. He just had like a crash out about LED lights on skylights or something. I don't even know what he's talking about. He had a crash out about LED lights on skyscrapers, and now we have to talk about Deng Xiaoping and explain it to him like he's 10 years old.
By Deng Xiaoping, who explains
This is a quote from Deng Xiaoping.
it pretty well. A planned economy is not the definition of socialism because there is planning under capitalism. A market economy is not the definition of capitalism because there are markets under socialism. The essence of socialism is liberation and development of the productive forces, elimination of exploitation and polarization, and the ultimate achievement of prosperity for all. Marx knew this too when he was writing Capital. He said the circulation of commodities is the starting point of capital. Markets are older than capitalism. Marx is saying that markets or commodity exchange exists before capitalism. Capitalism builds on them, but it's not identical to them. I didn't need to read Marx to prove this, right? There was obviously markets. There was obviously trade before capitalism. Capitalism is not as old as trade itself. Those are two different things. Capitalism is a specific historical mode of production. There was markets under feudalism. There was buying and selling of things under feudalism. And there will be buying and selling of things under socialism. All these isms are about who actually owns the things, who decides the direction of the economy and what we produce and how we distribute it. That's what all these things are about. It's not about markets or if you can buy or sell things. It's about the direction. It's all about the direction. It's all about who owns it. So yeah, while China might invite Walmart to do business to enrich the local economy, Walmart cannot decide the direction of the economy. They don't have any input on the 5-year plans, right? And if China wants Walmart out tomorrow, they will be out tomorrow. Communists are interested in the actual advancement of society, starting with the economics, right? There's a quote by Lenin that says, "For socialism is merely the next step forward from state capitalist monopoly." Or in other words, socialism is merely state capitalist monopoly, which is made to serve the interests of the whole people and has to that extent ceased to be capitalist monopoly. China is simply just following this. China is simply following the new economic policy that Lenin originally had laid out. Are you going to say that Lenin himself was a capitalist? Because I don't think so. I don't think you would make that claim, Mentiswave. That would be a
Yes, that would be a very dumb thing to do. Anyways, great breakdown. Everyone go subscribe to Red God new channel. First video, doing great work over there. Great first video. And 10,000 views on the first video. That's impressive. Okay, well, lots to look out there. At least I think that's his first video. Or second video. Okay. Well, anyways, everybody, that's all. I think we have thoroughly debunked the anime Reddit lover Mentiswave. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being banned, we are finally back home on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and also join as a member on our channel using the link at the top of the description. I rely on the generous support of viewers like yourself to get the truth out to as many people as possible. You can also support the show on Locals or Give Sin Go. The mainstream media and the powers that be are never going to stop attacking us for bringing the truth to as many people as we do. Thank you so much for your support.